Our protagonist's life was defined by one thing from the moment he was born: endless bad luck. The very moment his mother held him for the first time, full of joy, his father received news that would change everything. The family business had gone bankrupt. The misery was so great that he fed himself with whatever he found along the way. Born into extreme poverty, the boy learned early on what it was like to be in need. But that was just the beginning of a lifetime of bad luck. Bad luck followed him everywhere. If he walked down the street, a car would hit him out of nowhere. When shopping, he was mistaken for a thief. And even when eating, something always went wrong. And in the end, all this streak of bad luck led him to one inevitable destiny. But suddenly, he was no longer dead. The young man found himself in an unknown place, and a hungry beast was staring at him closely. Before him, a gigantic white tiger was preparing to attack, emanating an aura of pure power. The beast advanced with absurd speed, but the protagonist managed to dodge by a hair's breadth. With no time to think, he retaliated with a desperate punch, using all the strength he had in his body. The impact was brutal, but the blow stopped inches from the target. He hadn't managed to hit the beast. That's when reality hit. He didn't understand why he was there facing that monster. With his usual bad luck, he knew that a punch wouldn't solve anything. He would probably just get bitten. And, as predicted, his destiny was to be devoured. In his last moments, the protagonist reflected on the life he should have had, remembering everything he had gone through from the beginning. Until a voice pulled him from his thoughts, asking sharply if he was paying attention. He barely managed to answer, and the voice was already complaining about how unfocused young people are these days. The owner of the voice was a girl who seemed bored with the situation. She accused him of not even caring about what was happening. He observed that she herself looked like a child and was still smoking. Annoyed, the girl blamed him for breaking her promise to quit smoking. Her answer to his questioning was direct and completely unexpected. She claimed to be a goddess. This goddess explained that, because he had died so young, she would use her divine power to reincarnate him in another world. To help him, she also granted him 3 unique abilities. The only detail was that the abilities were chosen completely randomly. The protagonist, however, protested immediately. He said that it was ridiculous, as the 3 abilities he received were completely useless. The goddess, who didn't even remember his name, had to ask again. He introduced himself as Mutu Kushina, a name she found difficult to memorize. She admitted that anyway, Kushina's luck was terrible. But then, the goddess noticed something strange in his expression. She noticed a bizarre and frightening smile on the young man's face, who seemed satisfied with the mention of his own bad luck. The goddess was terrified by that smile. Kushina simply explained that, if luck favors those who smile, his life was proof that he was unlucky even in that. Trying to ignore the bizarre moment, the goddess decided to return to the subject and explain the 3 abilities he had received. She then listed the 3 supposed abilities: immortality, super fast regeneration, and determination, a spirit that cannot be broken. Continuing, the goddess began to explain the first ability, super fast regeneration. The name said almost everything. She detailed that the power healed wounds almost instantly. However, there was a fatal catch. The ability had a limited number of uses, and if he exceeded it, he would simply die. Next, she presented the second ability, which sounded equally impressive: immortality, or the ability not to age. The goddess confirmed that it was exactly what it seemed. He would not age. Kushina still didn't see the problem. For now, the 2 abilities seemed incredible, but she warned him that he would soon understand why they were useless. The real problem, according to the goddess, was the third and last ability: determination, an indomitable spirit. So that he could understand the complexity of the situation, she decided to use an analogy that he would certainly know, that of a video game. She explained that every living being works as if it had a life bar. Injuries and illnesses decrease it, and when it reaches 0, it's game over. It is at this point that the determination ability would come into action. It only activated at the exact moment when he was on the verge of death. Instead of dying, he would revive with only a single point of life. The explanation only left the protagonist even more confused. He questioned if this meant that he couldn't die. The goddess confirmed, but revealed the catch. He would be trapped in a near-death state, and worse, he would never be able to use the ability. She paused, leaving the contradiction hanging in the air, while Kushina tried to understand how an ability he possessed could be impossible to use. The goddess then prepared to reveal the reason. There was a very specific activation condition for that power. For the ability to work, he couldn't be afraid of death. A seemingly simple condition, but fundamentally impossible. She explained that every living being has a natural instinct for survival, which makes the fear of death the most basic and terrifying emotion of all. Then, she spoke with the authority of her position. As a goddess who has observed countless reincarnations, she could state one thing with complete certainty. With the authority of a goddess, she gave her final verdict. She stated that there isn't a single person who isn't afraid of death, making Kushina's most powerful ability completely useless. She reminded him of his initial enthusiasm, questioning whether he still thought his abilities were amazing. The goddess made it clear that the reality was quite different and much crueler. Kushina was paralyzed, speechless. The harsh truth hit him hard, undoing any hope he might have had. Then came the deity's final sentence. With those useless abilities, she stated that he would never be able to survive in another world. And with that statement, everything simply disappeared. In the next instant, the protagonist found himself thrown into the middle of a forest. He had been sent to another world, exactly as the goddess said. Her words still echoed in his mind. He finally understood why his abilities were considered a failure, repeating to himself that he wouldn't be able to survive. Sitting on the grass, he observed the vastness of the forest before him, an unknown and wild world where he was abandoned to face his destiny alone. It began to sink in. He really was in another place, a completely new world, and the feeling of loneliness began to weigh on him. Analyzing the environment, he noticed that at least there was plenty of brush around. With a dark sense of humor, he thought that, in the worst case, he wouldn't starve. Soon after, he found a stream with clean water. For a brief moment, a spark of hope arose, and he wondered if he could survive there after all. But that hope was interrupted by a painful memory, the face of a girl apologizing for not being able to do anything to help him. He splashed water on his face in a desperate attempt to ward off that memory and the pain it brought with it. Refusing to give in to despair, he forced a smile through his tears. He reminded himself that he needed to keep smiling, as things would only get worse if he gave up. With renewed determination, he began searching for anything he could use. Beside the stream, he found some vines that seemed like a good start. Trying to stay positive, the protagonist continued his search for resources. Soon, he found some mushrooms that, at first glance, looked edible and gave him a glimmer of hope. He reflected that maybe it was a good thing he hadn't ended up in a city full of people. The young man tried to convince himself that, somehow, he would be able to survive alone in that place. After all, he admitted to himself that being around other people always made him nervous. Only he didn't realize he wasn't alone. Too late. Out of nowhere, a wild beast jumped out of the trees and attacked him with brutal violence. The impact threw him far away. He barely had time to understand what had happened, falling to the ground completely stunned. A sharp pain brought him back to reality. He looked at his own arm, or rather at the place where it should be. The agony was unbearable. The shock gave way to excruciating pain when he realized that his arm had been completely torn off. Even the beast seemed surprised. It paused for a moment, looking at the severed limb in its hand, confused by what had just happened. But then the impossible happened. The protagonist looked on in shock as his arm began to regenerate at an absurd speed. He wondered if this was some kind of super-accelerated regeneration. The beast, however, didn't give him time to process the miracle. It advanced again, stomping hard to crush him once and for all. Pressed under the weight of the monster, he felt an overwhelming force. But to his surprise, his body resisted, and he began to push the creature's paw back. The monster grunted, not understanding where so much resistance was coming from in that fragile human. Annoyed, the creature grabbed him with its gigantic hand, lifting him into the air as if he were nothing. The pressure on his body was immense. The beast began to squeeze with the clear intention of crushing him to the end. With his life hanging by a thread, the protagonist used what was left of his strength for a desperate counterattack, plunging his fingers directly into the monster's eye. The beast reacted with brutal violence to the attack, shaking the protagonist in the air as if he were nothing. Meanwhile, the goddess watched everything from afar, completely disappointed. She was already sure that he wouldn't survive in that world. In a final act of fury, the monster bit down on the young man with all its might, and the pain that followed was unbearable. The goddess concluded mockingly that the protagonist's so-called useless ability really hadn't served any purpose in the end. She reflected that he simply couldn't do it. He failed to overcome the challenges of that world, and consequently failed to help with her plans. The conclusion was obvious. He'd been eaten and was now trapped in the monster's stomach. Not even super-accelerated regeneration could save him from this. And what about his determination, his indomitable spirit? To the goddess, that was absolutely useless. But then, something completely unexpected happened. She was already preparing to discard him and look for a new candidate for reincarnation, when suddenly, her expression changed completely. From inside the beast, a fist emerged with absurd strength, forcing its way out. The goddess simply couldn't believe what she was seeing. The monster panicked, not understanding what the heck was happening. Something was forcing its way from the inside out, tearing its throat. With a final spasm, the wild beast fell to the ground, completely defeated. And above its body, the protagonist stood tall. Back in her room, the goddess could barely process the information. Against all odds, he was alive. He not only survived, he was reborn from death. Emerging from the remains of the creature that devoured him, the young man proved that his will was stronger than any misfortune. The goddess was trying to understand what had just happened. She wondered if the young man's regeneration ability had been activated at the last second, but it seemed impossible. Or maybe, she thought, it was his indomitable spirit that saved him. An ability that also shouldn't have been activated. She knew it was impossible for an ordinary person to use that skill. While the goddess was lost in confusion, the protagonist could only wonder why. But his scream wasn't of relief or pain. It was of pure frustration. He yelled, desperate, wanting to know why he had survived. The goddess was completely speechless. That despair at being alive was something she simply couldn't comprehend. In his mind, the protagonist went over everything. He was reincarnated by a strange god, received a useless healing ability, and was devoured by a monster. He was sure he was finally going to die. But no, against all his wishes, he was alive. The young man shouted that he thought he would finally get to die. His despair was total. He wondered how much longer he would be forced to keep living. Upon hearing that, the goddess could only think one thing. What a bizarre situation. She recapped the facts. Somehow, he used an ability that was supposed to be impossible to use and literally came back from the dead. Except the author of this miracle wasn't a hero with a will to live. It was someone who desired death more than anything else in the world. The goddess watched him, trying to decipher that enigma. She wondered what kind of twisted person he was to have such a dark desire, but the protagonist didn't care what they thought of him. He only felt the pain of having to continue living against his will. Above the body of the defeated beast, his lament echoed through the forest. He just wanted to know why he had to survive. The young man then shouted to the heavens, demanding an answer from the god who put him there. And it was at that moment that the goddess understood. The key to everything was that ability. The one that was supposed to be completely useless. And there was the answer. The ability that the goddess considered useless, indomitable spirit, was activated. It was the cause of his forced survival, a power that worked against his own will. It finally clicked for the protagonist. He hadn't just survived the beast's attack. He had somehow come back from the dead. For anyone else, it would be a miracle. For him, it was a nightmare coming true. And the irony was cruel. This unwanted resurrection happened just when he believed he could finally rest in peace. such a powerful survival ability, granted to someone who didn't even have the will to live. The cruelty of fate was too much for him to bear. The goddess watched, incredulous. She repeated the name of the ability to herself, stating that this was, in fact, a perversely twisted fate. Amidst his despair, the protagonist shouted, questioning why he always got the worst hands in life. To him, this wasn't a blessing, it was more like a curse. But the goddess heard that and didn't like it, calling a miracle like that a bad hand. The boy's audacity left her perplexed and even a little annoyed. The name of the ability echoed in the young man's mind, bringing back the memory of another person. He remembered a man who also possessed that same unwavering spirit. That was the trigger for the goddess. To understand the present, she needed to look at the past. She then searched her archives for the complete record of the protagonist's life, and what she found in those pages left her completely speechless. His life was a continuous record of tragedies, a sequence of moments where he rose, only to be brutally knocked down again, time after time. From the beginning, misfortune haunted him like a shadow. Accidents, injuries. Pain was a constant in his existence, almost as if the world was conspiring against him. The physical pain was unbearable, but the suffering of seeing his parents in despair was even worse. He was trapped between consciousness and darkness, wishing it would all end. The blame for the accident fell on the driver, but for the boy, the only reality was pain, a pain that defined every second of his life up to that moment. Yuto woke up in the hospital. Alone, broken, and with pain as his only companion, he stared at the ceiling, reliving the accident that put him there. A nurse came in to check on him. She called him unbreakable and asked if the painkillers were helping. The boy's response was an almost inaudible no. With a look of pity, the nurse explained that because he was a minor, they couldn't administer more medication. He would simply have to endure the pain. She advised him to rest and left, but as soon as the curtain closed, a familiar voice called him by name. It was his parents. Upon seeing the visitors, the nurse asked if they were his father and mother, with a surprised tone in her voice. Outside the curtain before they left, Yuto's parents heard from the nurse that their son's recovery was going well. When they finally entered, the atmosphere of the room changed completely. With wide and disturbing smiles, they greeted him. Yuto barely managed to respond. There was something very wrong with those smiles, a joy that didn't match the situation. His mother approached and asked how it went, but her tone wasn't one of concern for his health. She grabbed her son's pajamas, making it clear that she was talking about the accident. Yuto, confused, didn't understand the question. Then, she pulled up his clothes, revealing a back covered in horrible scars. Her question was cold and calculating. If those marks had been declared as a result of the accident. Upon hearing the confirmation, his parents sighed, visibly relieved. Their concern wasn't for their son, but for the version of the story. The cruel truth came to light. They were celebrating the compensation they would receive from the driver, a high amount for involving a child. Finally, they wouldn't have to worry about money for a while. Yuto remembered all the times he was forced to participate in petty scams like faking falls or hiding stolen goods in his backpack. To his parents, they were just child's play. The justification was always the same. They were extremely poor, and the promise was terrifying. As soon as he recovered, he would have to do it all again. The cycle had no end. While he recovered in the hospital bed, his parents were already planning the next scam. They said that next time, he should aim for an even fancier car to guarantee good compensation. Since birth, the protagonist had carried a terrible weight. His parents believed that his arrival had brought only disgrace and bad luck to the family, and they made sure he knew it. At first, he thought it was just the stress caused by poverty, but over time, his parents' frustration turned into malicious and cruel comments directed at him. Soon, words were no longer enough. Slaps and assaults became routine, a normal and painful part of his childhood. And the worst of all was the guilt he felt. The young man became convinced that he was beaten because he deserved it, that it was natural for his parents to be angry with him for bringing so much bad luck. He imagined what it would be like if he were a luckier child. Maybe his parents would smile and praise him. But the reality was his father yelling that his life had been ruined because of him. Over time, he finally realized that his parents were wrong. The problem wasn't him. Only, by this point, the young man no longer had the strength to resist or fight against it. His father left, but not without giving one last order, that he clean up all the mess before his return. The humiliation was complete. Alone, he just stood there, defeated. Without emotion, he began to clean up the mess, as he always did. It was an endless cycle of pain and obedience. His hand trembled, exhausted. A simple glass of water was spilled. He remembered that in the beginning, he obeyed in the hope of receiving some praise. But when he realized that it would never come, his obedience became just a mechanism to avoid being beaten. On television, a program asked a father what his greatest treasure was. The answer was immediate: his son. For that man, the simple existence of the child was precious, a world that the protagonist didn't know. The scene reminded him of a night when the memory was of a pain that went beyond the physical. His father assaulted him for something simple, not laughing at a joke. To prevent the violence from happening again, Jin practiced a fake smile to exhaustion, convincing himself that now, finally, he knew how to smile properly. The memories were a blur of violence. His mother assaulted him with a hot frying pan, and his father, drunk, threw objects at him, wishing for his death while breaking bottles on his body. The cruelty had no limits. Even sick, he was kicked for not resting. His head was submerged in the sink until he could barely breathe. Threatened with a knife, he felt the terror before being cut. The violence was constant and came from all sides. He was kicked, hit, strangled. He was thrown against walls and even forced into cars. A routine of endless pain. After so much suffering, something inside him changed. The look that remained was empty, devoid of any emotion. In the hospital, he concluded that pain was inevitable in his life. He even thought that next time, he would aim for an even more expensive car. He believed that, by acting that way, he wouldn't need to feel anything anymore. The physical pain became a distraction for a much greater suffering. That accident was a revelation. He was covered in injuries, but felt a strange and disturbing calm. That's when he came to a frightening conclusion. No matter what happened, as long as he felt nothing, he wouldn't suffer. And at that moment, he realized he didn't feel anything anymore. He had learned the art of completely blocking out pain. For the first time in a long time, he believed he could get a good night's sleep. And so, amidst the destruction of his body, he found a distorted peace. His parents' visit broke the tranquility. With a smile, his mother hurried him to get discharged, reminding him that housework awaited him. He reflected that he only survived thanks to years of practice in ignoring pain. He admitted to himself that he exaggerated his injuries to avoid work. Looking outside, he had a dark certainty that life with his parents would continue until the day he died. The goddess analyzed the protagonist's life records, and the expression on her face changed with each page. His file told an unbelievable story. She picked up the boy's photo and tried to process everything she had read. So, that had been his life. She concluded that the young man's past was brutal, but something else caught her attention. There was a detail that didn't fit. It was an ability called Unbreakable Spirit, a power that brought its user back from the brink of death with just one hit point. But the activation condition was what perplexed her. You had to have no fear of death. A requirement that she knew was almost impossible to achieve. She reflected on what not being afraid of death really meant. It wasn't as simple as just not being afraid to die. The goddess began to analyze the concept from its base. Pain. Pain is a fundamental survival mechanism for all living beings. When a living being feels pain, the brain detects that something is wrong with the body and sounds an internal alarm. This alarm instinctively awakens negative emotions such as sadness, anger, or even despair, causing the living being to fear pain. The fear of pain, even the smallest one, is a survival instinct that protects the body and keeps it alive. If someone didn't feel fear of pain, they wouldn't be able to avoid danger or notice an illness, which would inevitably lead to death. The conclusion was clear and direct. In short, the fear of pain was the same thing as the fear of death. Therefore, not being afraid of death meant something much deeper, complete mastery over one's own pain. The goddess realized that this was not something that could be achieved just by enduring suffering. It wasn't nearly that easy. After all, even people who want to die at the last moment feel fear and pain. It's an instinct that no one can ignore. In the end, the goddess understood that it all came down to one thing: the instinct for self-preservation. It was the key to the young man's almost impossible ability. Analyzing the protagonist's record, she wondered if he had spent his entire difficult life completely overcoming pain, thus forging an unbreakable spirit. The implication was shocking. That would mean that he no longer felt pain, not even the primal fear of death. Meanwhile, back in reality, the protagonist felt the overwhelming weight of the beast on him, a blow that should have been the end of everything. But, against all expectations, he got up. Looking to the side, he realized that the giant creature was already dead. The monster could no longer kill him. Relief took over the young man, who began to laugh, but it was not a laugh of joy. It was a laugh of pure frustration. Once again, his luck had run out. He survived when all he wanted was the end. His whole life had been like walking through an endless desert. Each day was a desperate struggle just to survive. He was so focused on enduring the next day that he never had time to even think about a way to escape that suffering. Until finally, he found the answer. The only real escape from his miserable life was death. And now, there he was, standing next to a colossal beast that failed to give him the end he so desperately sought. Another failure. He pulled from his memories by a sharp sound. The boy barely had time to process what was happening. An arrow was coming at high speed, straight towards him. The arrow exploded on impact. The boy was swallowed by the force of the explosion, without the slightest chance to protect himself. The force of the explosion threw him back without any chance of defense, and before the young man could recover, a new rain of arrows was already on its way, ready to end everything at once. Hidden among the trees, a young woman watched the scene. She couldn't believe that the target was still standing, and a single thought formed in her mind. That man was a problem. For her, there was no doubt. Someone who survives an explosion like that was not an ordinary person. He was dangerous and needed to be eliminated immediately. But to understand how things got to this point, it was necessary to go back a little in time, to a moment that defined all the protagonist's bad luck. It all started with a car accident, a tragic event that, in reality, was just one more of the countless misfortunes that the young man had faced since he was born. He survived by a miracle, but the trauma of that day never left him. The feeling of near death became a constant in his life. Each step he took was a struggle. Every breath, a reminder that he was still alive, even when he no longer wanted to be. Back in the present, the explosion that hit him was devastating. A surprise attack, coming from someone watching him from afar, waiting for the right moment. The one responsible was the girl in the tree. She didn't hesitate to use full force, certain that a single blow would be more than enough to solve the problem. But her plan failed. Seeing that the target survived unscathed, the archer's confidence turned to shock. She began to question if he was even human. Far away, the goddess who gave the protagonist his powers watched everything with despair. She couldn't believe the situation had gotten so out of control. She regretted her choice, realizing the terrible mistake she had made. The other person she reincarnated in that world, Runa Kakyoin, was now trying to eliminate the protagonist. Back in the forest, Runa watched the smoke dissipate, still in disbelief at what she saw. Her target should have been in pieces, but the protagonist was standing. The pain was intense, but he didn't die. He even compared the pain of the explosion to being run over and concluded that the car accident was much worse. Runa's shock was immense when she saw him standing, looking directly at her. Disbelieving, she prepared another arrow, determined not to fail this time. And without losing a second, the girl fired again. Another arrow cut through the air, heading straight for the young man who just couldn't die. The second arrow was fired. Runa wasn't going to make the same mistake twice, aiming precisely to end this once and for all. Out of nowhere, the arrow simply appeared in front of the protagonist. He barely had time to react to the projectile's speed. From afar, Runa demanded that he stop pretending to be human and show his true form. To her, it was obvious that he was a monster. The girl was confused by his expression, and the protagonist replied that he was human, and that was his smile. Runa didn't seem very convinced. She remembered the scene where he was bitten and crushed by the beast. In her mind, it was impossible for anyone to have survived that. Runa concluded that he could only be a mysterious creature from another world, something the little goddess had mentioned. The protagonist also reflected on being in a new place. Annoyed, Runa described the goddess as a rude, chain-smoking brat. To her surprise, the protagonist simply agreed with the description. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the goddess watched everything with pure frustration. She couldn't believe what Runa Kakyoin was doing. The goddess cursed the situation, realizing that her pack of cigarettes had been completely crushed in the confusion. She complained that the stress was so much that she would need to buy a whole pack of cigarettes, or she wouldn't be able to handle the pressure of having reincarnated those people. Back in the forest, Runa's frustration was visible. She wondered why she always ended up having to deal with the most problematic reincarnated people. The protagonist, hearing her lament, asked if she was referring to people like him, who simply refused to die. But in the midst of all that tension, the unexpected happened. Runa's concentration was broken when she tripped over a tree root, and with a scream, the skilled archer simply fell into the bushes, completely losing her pose and advantage. The protagonist stood there, alone and not understanding what had just happened. But he forgot one detail. The arrow she fired was still coming towards him. Despite the situation, the protagonist's first reaction was concern. He tried to warn the girl about the roots and asked if she was okay, still not understanding the danger she was in. But the problem wasn't the fall. A giant snake had already captured her, wrapping her in a deadly embrace before she could react. As he approached, the protagonist finally understood the situation. The girl who tried to kill him seconds ago was completely immobilized by the creature. Shock paralyzed the young man for a moment, and the snake began to squeeze, crushing the girl's body with tremendous force. In a panic, she struggled and screamed for the monster to release her, but it was useless. Desperate, she begged the protagonist for help, asking him not to just stand there. With each passing second, the creature's grip grew stronger, taking away the girl's air and strength. The protagonist knew the situation was terrible, but a part of him hesitated. Meanwhile, the girl's screams turned to whispers, begging to be saved. Fear took over him. He questioned what he could do against a monster that size. The answer was obvious. Nothing. His mind went blank, and then reason spoke louder than instinct. He remembered that this was the same girl who attacked him mercilessly. Why should he risk his life to save her? A painful memory surfaced, explaining his hesitation. He remembered that, in his life, even when he was on the verge of death, no one ever appeared to help him. He was always alone in his suffering. A woman blamed him for everything, saying that he was a bad boy, and that violence was the only way for him to learn. It was the justification she used for her actions. And even while she assaulted him, the woman victimized herself, saying that it hurt her too. At that moment, his cry for help echoed in his mind, a cry that no one ever heard. The girl's desperate scream snapped him out of his memories. It was a cry for help that echoed his own past, a sound he knew all too well. He felt angry at himself for hesitating. His mind told him to do nothing, to leave her, but his body seemed to have other ideas. That sound of pure dread was forcing him to act. It was a trigger that awakened something that not even logic could stop. And then, instinct overcame reason. His body began to move on its own. Before he could think about the consequences, he had already decided that he needed to save her, no matter what. He advanced without hesitation. A terrible feeling warned him that if he stood still, something much worse would happen. And even if it seemed impossible, even if it was an act of pure madness, he needed to at least try. With all the strength he could muster, he delivered a direct blow to the snake's head. The impact was surprisingly effective. The creature recoiled, loosening its grip on the girl for an instant. The beast's violent reaction threw both him and the girl away. When the dust settled, the snake was on the ground, motionless. The girl, finally free, was trying to catch her breath. In shock, she asked what he had just done. But the confusion was mutual. The protagonist also couldn't explain where he got that strength. The girl insisted, trying to understand how he had done that. But the only answer the protagonist had was complete and utter internal panic. The girl, still in a panic, wouldn't accept his confusion. She pointed to the dead creature, accusing him of being responsible, since the snake had fallen without even being touched. Doubt began to take over the protagonist. It was then that the shock hit him. That strength could only have come from his ability, the same one he always considered useless. For the first time, the power that marked his life with misfortune manifested in a way he didn't understand. And that would change everything. Kushina stared at his own fist, completely shocked. He couldn't understand how a single punch was capable of causing such great damage to the giant serpent. He was totally confused, trying to process what had just happened and where that absurd strength came from. Only then did he realize that he wasn't alone there. Chapter 4. Near the monster's carcass, a girl was sitting on the ground, looking as stunned as he was. Still recovering, the young woman thanked Kushina for saving her. She also apologized, explaining that she had attacked him before by pure mistake. The girl then questioned him, saying that she thought he was one of the forest monsters, but now she realized that he was also one of the reincarnated. She listed everything she witnessed, the power to come back to life after being devoured, and the strength to take down the serpent with one blow, asking if these were the abilities the goddess gave him. Kushina, however, denied it. He explained that his only ability was to heal repeatedly, and that he himself had no idea how he had managed to defeat the snake. But the young woman seemed to know more than he did. She recited Kushina's 3 exact abilities: super rapid regeneration, immortality, and determination. She concluded that with a set of powers like that, it would be practically impossible to truly hurt him. The conversation changed focus. Kushina remembered seeing her create an arrow out of nowhere and asked if that was her ability. In response, the girl demonstrated her power, materializing a huge dark weapon in her hands. The demonstration of power left Kushina completely shocked and speechless. After the demonstration, the girl explained her ability: creation. She could materialize anything out of nowhere, as long as she knew exactly how the object was made. And as proof, she created a new outfit for Kushina, saying that he couldn't continue walking around with his clothes all torn. Kushina then remembered the arrow. The girl tried to simplify the concept, questioning if it was just an arrow made with gunpowder. Her companion, however, brought her back to reality, explaining that such a simple weapon would be useless against real monsters. The scene continues. The young man confirmed that his name was Kushina, and, recognizing something familiar, asked if the other person was Japanese. In response, the mysterious voice demonstrated a peculiar curiosity, wanting to know how that name was spelled. With the identity confirmed, the mysterious voice concluded that they were no longer enemies. Kushina, however, was already walking away, aware that they couldn't stay in that dangerous forest for long. The young man suggested that they needed to find a safe place, like a city. However, he himself refused the idea right away, leaving his companion completely confused by the sudden decision. Since going to a city was out of the question, the young man went for a more direct solution. His companion, however, was completely surprised, not understanding what he was about to do. And that direct solution was this. With a disturbing smile, the young man revealed that he planned to die right there. The statement left his companion in complete shock, not understanding what was happening. And without even waiting for an answer, the young man said goodbye and simply threw himself off. His companion tried to scream to stop him, but it was already too late. In the last second, she managed to grab him, pulling him back with all her strength. Desperate, the young woman scolded him for his reckless attitude, questioning what the hell he thought he was doing. And he complained about her stopping him, saying that this was exactly why he hated being around other people. The girl, exhausted, retorted that she couldn't just stand by and watch. It was obvious that she would save him. The young man insisted that his life was his to do as he pleased, but the girl confronted him with a brutal truth. The two had already died once, before they could even live. For her, that chaotic place was a second chance. But before he could even react to that truth, the conversation was interrupted in the most brutal way possible. A quick and merciless blow struck the girl, silencing her words in midair. Kushina broke the silence with a brutal proposal. If Runa was so determined to die, he suggested that she do it in a more useful way, fighting the monsters in that place. He reminded her of the abilities she possessed, questioning whether such a simple method would really work. His logic was cold, but it made sense, leaving the girl speechless. It was then that Runa confessed the truth. She didn't want to die again. What she really wanted, with all her strength, was to live in that world, no matter how terrible it was. She recognized that Kushina had the power to defeat the creatures. With her fist clenched, the young woman admitted that her request was selfish and that she seemed to be taking advantage of him, but she had no other choice. Without further words, she bowed in a silent and desperate plea. And then, with her voice choked with emotion, Runa begged him to protect her. Kushina was speechless. He couldn't understand how someone, in a world where nothing made sense or seemed safe, could have such an immense and desperate will to live. The young man looked at his own hand, as if seeing for the first time the power or the curse he carried. He turned, agreeing with her. Runa was right. With the abilities he possessed, such a simple end would probably not be possible. However, he confessed that he didn't even understand how he had defeated that creature. Kushina wasn't sure if he would really be able to protect her as she asked. But despite all the uncertainty and the weight of responsibility, he clenched his fist and made a decision. He would try. The relief on Runa's face was immediate, and she thanked him, full of hope. Kushina, however, already seemed to be regretting the promise he had just made, to the girl's surprise. He continued to examine his hand, still unsure of what he was capable of. That power was a mystery even to him. With a handshake, the partnership was sealed. Now that they were in this together, Kushina stated that they needed to decide on the next step. His first suggestion was to camp. The idea of spending the night in that dangerous forest completely terrified Runa. Despite her fear, Runa remembered that she already had some experience fending for herself. She had slept on park benches and even eaten grass to survive, but a forest full of monsters. That was another story. Suddenly, Runa took control of the situation. With the confidence of someone who knew what she was doing, she listed the priorities for survival and assured Kushina that he could trust her. After all, she had been a scout. And so, she began to lead the way through the forest, with Kushina following close behind, just watching. The panel is blank. Kushina soon saw a problem with the search for food. He warned Runa not to touch any mushrooms, since there was no way to know which ones were poisonous. He then asked how she planned to make a fire, and Runa thought the idea of rubbing sticks together was ridiculous, stating that's what skills were for. With that, she found a small cave, a perfect shelter. She then revealed her grand plan for the fire. It wasn't any survival technique, but a simple lighter, which she presented with pride. She tried to light it, hoping for a quick and easy fire, but the lighter just clicked repeatedly, without producing any flame. Her confidence began to waver. In a fit of anger, Runa threw the lighter away. Kushina just watched and pointed out the obvious reason for the failure. The lighter was out of gas. Runa's frustration was immense. She realized the great flaw in her ability. She could only create things that she knew how to manufacture, and unfortunately, she had no idea how to produce gas. Annoyed, Runa declared that she would love to have a little chat with the goddess who gave her such a limited power. The mention of a deity completely confused Kushina. But the conversation was interrupted by a tremor. Suddenly, the cave they had found as a safe haven began to move and crack. That wasn't a cave. It was the leg of a colossal creature rising from the ground. The shelter they chose was, in fact, a gigantic monster. A stone rhinoceros rose before them, staring at the two with empty eyes. Trapped and with nowhere to run, Kushina and Runa found themselves face to face with a threat far greater than they expected. The shelter had become the predator. The initial shock paralyzed Kushina and Runa. Faced with that colossal creature, the only possible reaction was pure dread. It was Runa who broke the silence, screaming desperately for Kushina to run as fast as he could. But it was too late. With a violent movement, the stone rhinoceros launched a spike attack, throwing the two away. The impact was brutal. While Runa was still down, Kushina managed to stand up, even though he could already feel the pain of the wound on his shoulder. Except, he didn't move. Kushina stood his ground, refusing to back down a single step, and he paid the price for it. One of the projectiles hit him squarely in the middle of the chest. Ignoring his own pain, Kushina grabbed Runa and carried her away from danger. She didn't understand his reaction to that thing. The rhinoceros gave no respite and advanced with total fury. With a single stomp, the creature made a forest of stone spikes sprout from the ground, blocking any escape route, completely cornered. Kushina threw himself on the ground to protect Runa, but in the midst of the chaos, suddenly the young man was thrown to. Even after being thrown away, something changed inside him. With a frightening determination, the young man remembered the promise he made. He would fight to protect her, no matter the cost. The girl desperately tried to stop him, questioning whether he even had a plan to win. But it was too late. Driven by the promise he made, the young man advanced without looking back, completely ignoring the warning. He didn't even see where it came from. The impact threw him back with absurd force, proving that the girl was right to worry. The attack was finally revealed, a trap of thorns that sprouted from the ground itself. Only then did the opponent realize how big his mistake was. The power of that mysterious figure was on a completely different level. The attack threw him mercilessly. Kushina didn't have the slightest chance to react against the wave of thorns that emerged from the ground. The impact was brutal. The thorns pierced his body in several places, and the pain made him scream. It was an injury that no one should survive. The creature didn't even need to move. Its power was so immense that the entire battlefield became a deadly trap for the young man. Watching from afar, Runa panicked. She knew that Kushina had an absurd healing ability, but the damage he suffered was simply too much. The damage was visible. There was no recovering from that. Fallen and broken, Kushina realized the harsh reality. He couldn't even get close to the enemy. He was still breathing, but he had already given up. Kushina asked the creature to just finish him off, questioning why such a stronger being was still leaving him alive. At that moment, his thoughts turned to someone else. He thought that if he died there, he would have broken his promise. He wondered if Runa would forgive him for trying his best, but still failing. With a bitter smile, he answered his own question. Probably not. He concluded that he had never been forgiven for anything in his life anyway. He thought that, in the end, none of it would matter when he was dead. But suddenly, something appeared out of nowhere, floating right in front of him. An intense light emanated from the mysterious object, and with that, everything changed. The hesitation and despair disappeared. Kushina stood up, facing the stone rhinoceros once more. The fight wasn't over yet. Seeing that Kushina was standing again, Runa decided to create an opening for him. She prepared her bow, not for a direct attack, but for a distraction. The idea was to use the noise to attract the monster's attention. She shot the arrows away from the main target on purpose. The plan worked. The stone rhinoceros turned its head towards the sound. It was the chance Kushina needed. He took advantage of the opening and advanced. The young man didn't understand why Runa didn't abandon him to save herself. Her attitude saved him, but also put him in a position of no return. Now, running away was no longer an option. There was only one thing left to do: fight with everything he had. And with this new determination, Kushina launched the first blow. The impact was brutal, but not for the creature. The monster's skin was as hard as a rock. The punch broke Kushina's hand, not the enemy's defense. Runa watched the scene, horrified by what she saw, but he didn't stop. Even with his hand destroyed, the young man prepared his other fist and attacked again. The result was the same: more pain, more injuries, but the creature remained intact. Kushina ignored logic and pain. He kept punching non-stop, blow after blow, in a frantic and desperate attack. Runa couldn't understand. Seeing Kushina all injured, she questioned why he kept fighting like that. To her, the fight already seemed lost. But Kushina didn't answer. He simply prepared another blow, ignoring her pain and despair. And it was at that moment that Runa understood. He wasn't fighting for the sake of fighting. Kushina was trying at any cost to fulfill the promise he made to protect her. With that determination, his punch hit the target. Only this time, something was different. A cracking sound echoed. It wasn't his hand that was breaking. It was the monster's stone skin. The entire creature began to fall apart. The rhinoceros's rocky body completely crumbled. Amidst the rubble, only Kushina stood, exhausted and injured but victorious. Runa stared in disbelief at the scene. She could hardly believe he had done it. Kushina felt the pain of his injuries, but Runa could only feel relief, happy that he was okay. She ran to him, completely impressed. Runa congratulated him, saying it was incredible that he had defeated that beast alone. But Kushina wasn't celebrating. He looked at his own hands, realizing that he had done it again. He remembered that at the beginning, punching the creature broke his arm. But now, a new theory arose in his mind. Could it be that the more damage he took, the stronger he became? The victory celebration was short-lived. Out of nowhere, an invisible force struck Kushina head-on, throwing him backward with absurd violence. He barely had time to process what had happened. His mind was blank, overcome by pure and utter confusion. The impact against the ground was brutal, kicking up dust and rock shards everywhere. Before he could get up, a gigantic paw crushed the ground right next to him. A new threat had appeared. And then, the creature revealed itself. It wasn't the same monster, but a smaller stone rhinoceros, which emerged from the shadows with a furious roar. Fallen, Kushina noticed that the creature was smaller than the previous one. Runa, however, couldn't believe that it was still alive and that the fight wasn't over. Looking at the broken stone blocks, she wondered if this new creature had emerged from there. Kushina could barely move, the pain paralyzing him on the ground as the small beast slowly approached. Without warning, the rhinoceros charged. The creature passed right by Runa and attacked Kushina with unbelievable savagery, leaving the girl in shock. The blow threw him away once again. He fell hard without any chance to defend himself or react. But the attack didn't stop there. The rhinoceros began to fire a rain of projectiles that tore through the air and Kushina's body. It was a massacre. Each blow hit him mercilessly, over and over again, in an unrelenting sequence. Runa could only watch, screaming Kushina's name in complete despair as he was tortured by the incessant attack. It was then that she realized the terrible truth. The creature was too fast. Even with Kushina's regeneration, such a constant attack was impossible to survive. He didn't stand a chance. Seeing that Kushina wouldn't survive that attack, Runa decided she needed to intervene. She couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. But before she could do anything, the colossal creature turned and noticed her. It was too late. The brutal impact threw her away, disarmed and completely vulnerable on the ground. Fallen and breathless, she saw the despair on Kushina's face. Seeing her in danger changed everything for him. The stone rhinoceros now had a new target. Completely ignoring the young man, the creature began to advance towards Runa. She was paralyzed by fear, unable to move as the beast approached for the final blow. Out of nowhere, Kushina threw himself in front, intercepting the monster's charge with his own body. The creature roared in fury at being interrupted, but the boy didn't give in, shouting back with pure determination. With surprising strength, he managed to push the beast back, gaining a precious instant. Runa screamed his name, shocked by the sudden turnaround and the sacrifice he was making. The monster, however, didn't give up. It turned even more furious, ready to attack again. The rhinoceros was faster, and its blow hit Kushina head-on. The pain was immense, and something strange began to happen to his hand. The attack hit him with the force of an avalanche. Even on the verge of collapse, he knew he couldn't die there. If he stood still doing nothing, Runa would be the next victim. With that thought driving him, he shouted to himself that he needed to dodge at all costs. After deciding that he needed to dodge, Kushina forced his body to the limit. He knew he needed to be faster, much faster than he had ever been. Every fiber of his being screamed for speed, but the monster's charge seemed inevitable. The stone rhinoceros was already on his heels, ready to crush him. With a last desperate effort, he threw himself to the side, feeling the wind of the attack pass grazing him. Runa watched, terrified. Kushina had narrowly escaped. He landed, panting, while the creature's horn opened a crater in the ground where he had been seconds before. The beast roared, frustrated at missing its target. But there was no time for rest. Another attack came right away, and Kushina needed to move again. He dodged once more, but the rhinoceros didn't stop, increasingly irritated by the young man's agility. The adrenaline kept him moving, but he felt his body reaching its limit. The chase continued, relentless, until his body finally gave out. He stumbled and fell exhausted, begging his muscles to obey, and it was in that exact moment of weakness that the monster saw its chance, advancing for the final blow. Gathering his last strength, Kushina forced himself to get up. The only option was to keep pushing himself, to go beyond his own limits. He needed to be faster. That was the only thing that mattered at that moment to protect himself and Runa. He needed to be faster. Pushing his body beyond any limit he had ever known, Kushina forced himself to accelerate more and more. Every fiber of his being screamed for more speed. And then, he did it. With a final burst, Kushina reached the creature and grabbed its horn with all the strength he had left. The prey had finally caught the predator. A smile spread across his face. He wasn't running anymore. Kushina finally felt like he had the creature in his hands. But the rhinoceros didn't let itself be captured so easily. With a violent jolt, the creature threw him away. He barely touched the ground and was already propelling himself back. Refusing to lose his rhythm, the young man advanced again, with a determination he didn't even know he had. His speed was so absurd that even Runa, who was watching from afar, could hardly believe it. He had finally reached the monster again. This time, Kushina focused all his strength on a single point, and delivered a devastating blow directly to the creature's horn. The impact was brutal. The stone horn, which seemed indestructible, shattered into pieces, throwing Kushina backward. As the creature roared in pain and fury, Kushina looked at his own hand, shocked by the power he had just unleashed. He always considered himself overwhelmingly weak, and, in contrast, he always saw the monster as an invincible force. He never doubted it, but something had changed. Faced with the wreckage of the horn, he realized that the balance of power might finally be turning in his favor. Faced with the wreckage of the horn, Kushina realized that the balance of power might finally be turning in his favor. A confident smile appeared on his face. Runa couldn't believe what she was seeing. The horn of that monster, strong enough to break rocks, had been shattered by a single blow. He remembered how that same creature had attacked him mercilessly. But now, with the skills he had acquired, the situation was completely different. Seeing the state of the rhinoceros, Runa began to doubt. Was the monster actually weak all along? But then, looking at Kushina, the truth hit her. It wasn't the rhinoceros that was weak. It was Kushina who had become absurdly stronger. The creature seemed exhausted, breathing heavily after receiving that massive damage. Runa felt a surge of hope. She believed that, with his current strength, Kushina could finally defeat the beast. But suddenly, A dull sound broke the silence. The rhinoceros began to gather energy, its silhouette becoming dark and menacing. The battle was far from over. And then, the creature exploded in a deafening roar, unleashing an overwhelming wave of power. A blast of scorching wind swept through the area. Runa felt the temperature rise to a dangerous level, realizing that they could be burned alive if they stayed there. But Kushina didn't back down. On the contrary, he advanced directly against the heat wave, clearing a path with his own brute strength. The determination on his face was unwavering. Nothing would stop him now. Meanwhile, Runa could barely protect herself from the intensity of the explosion. And then, the sound of the final impact echoed across the battlefield. The force of the explosion threw Runa away, who barely had time to protect herself from the overwhelming impact. The entire battlefield dissolved into a rain of debris and dust. And in the midst of the chaos, the once colossal stone rhinoceros, now reduced to a small creature, fell helplessly. The monster's body crashed violently against the ground. With a final thud, its energy disappeared completely. The battle, finally, was over. When the dust settled, Kushina was standing. He had won, but at a visible cost. His whole body ached, and his fist was completely destroyed from the final impact. Victory didn't come free. Still, he looked at the result of his efforts and felt a deep relief. He confirmed to himself that the threat had been neutralized. When Runa finally managed to compose herself, she looked at the scene, completely shocked by what she saw. But the tension of the battle gave way to an unexpected situation. Runa awkwardly acknowledged his strength, while Kushina only then realized he was exposed. Despite his condition, Kushina's first concern was for her, asking if she was hurt. Runa tried to disguise it, saying she was just a little tired. But it was more than tiredness. The tears came, and with them the memory of her family's rules. A member of the Kakyoin should never cry, no matter the situation. Frustrated with her own vulnerability, she snapped. She demanded that Kushina not look at her with pity in that pathetic state. Her anger then changed targets, accusing him of looking at her improperly. The young man, caught off guard, tried to cover himself, completely embarrassed. Runa then decided to solve the problem. She said she would make clothes for him, and for now, threw him something so he could cover himself. Kushina was totally embarrassed by the clothes Runa created. He tried to thank her, but it was impossible to hide how uncomfortable he was wearing a women's uniform. Runa, mortified, explained that in the rush, she ended up making an outfit for herself by mistake. The situation was so absurd that they both burst out laughing, breaking all the tension. Later, the tranquility of the night took over. They set up a small camp in the forest to rest, sitting around a campfire. Kushina offered to stand guard, but Runa insisted that he sleep first. She reminded him that their time was limited and he needed to regain his strength. She just wanted a moment to think alone. Understanding the message, Kushina agreed and settled down to rest. As he lay down, he watched Runa for a moment, lost in her own thoughts by the fire. That moment of peace was strange to him. Kushina reflected that, in his past life, he worked to exhaustion, so the simple idea of doing nothing seemed wrong. Even simple gestures like receiving a thank you or getting clothes were completely new and unfamiliar experiences for him. Meanwhile, Runa's mind was focused on their abilities. She thought about how these powers, similar to magic, were changing the game for both of them. She admitted to herself that she wasn't strong enough to face those monsters alone. It was then that a big realization hit. Kushina's abilities worked the same way as hers. And the most impressive thing was the speed at which he was evolving. Kushina's potential was becoming undeniable. Runa reviewed his powers in her mind: immortality, which prevented him from aging, and super-fast regeneration, capable of healing any injury almost instantly. And lastly, determination. A fighting spirit that would keep him alive against all odds, unless despair finally broke his will. She remembered how Kushina had described these powers to her. For him, they were just useless abilities that only served to prolong suffering without giving real power. But Runa knew that something had changed. She recalled that at the beginning of the fight, his punches barely scratched the stone monster, even breaking his own hands. She remembered how, in the beginning, he broke his own hands. But by insisting so much, his punches became powerful enough to crush rocks. The same happened with his running. Little by little, his speed became so great that he could keep up with the stone rhinoceros's attacks. Runa pondered that those three abilities, in theory, shouldn't grant that kind of power. But if Kushina was really getting stronger, the answer could only be in them. It was then that a theory arose in her mind, an idea that she simply couldn't ignore. Kushina called them useless abilities, but maybe there was something more. What if each ability, alone, was really useless? But together they became something completely different? The theory made perfect sense. The night passed. And with the first rays of sun, Kushina finally awoke. Suddenly, he realized that he had slept all night. He had completely forgotten to relieve Runa to stand guard. But then he remembered reality. They weren't in that house anymore. The life he knew was over. And looking up, the first thing he saw was Runa, holding a huge rock over his head, ready to crush him. With a blank expression, she made a bizarre and terrifying request. She asked if Kushina could please die for her. That request awakened a painful memory in Kushina, a memory of his mother who was always angry with him. He remembered that whenever his mother thought he wasn't being attentive enough, the consequence was always the same. Only the cycle didn't end with the aggression. There was always what came after. After everything, his mother always hugged him, crying and apologizing desperately, saying how sorry she was. And when she cried like that, calling herself a terrible mother and begging for forgiveness, Kushina simply couldn't completely hate her. That cycle of pain and regret left him completely paralyzed. But it was a pattern that never broke. She would apologize, only to assault him again the next day, and then apologize, and assault him again. It was an endless cycle. Because of that experience, Kushina understood very well how fickle people's hearts are. One moment, they can be your enemy, and the next, your ally. He learned that the hard way. And that's why, when he saw the girl preparing to attack him with a rock, he didn't react at all. In his head, he just felt like the same situation was repeating itself once again. He then asked Luna if she wanted to kill him. With a frightening resignation, Kushina told her to go ahead, as he wanted to die anyway. His response took Luna completely by surprise. Desperate, she tried to explain that she didn't really want to kill him, although she admitted that with a rock in her hand, the situation didn't look very friendly. She continued saying that, in the current setup, her intention wouldn't even make a difference. Luna finally dropped the rock and confessed that she was so eager to confirm a theory that she rushed things. She had noticed something about his abilities the night before. Kushina then asked what possibility she had thought about his three abilities. Luna apologized for the scare, admitting that she has a bad habit of acting like that. It was then that she revealed her great discovery. His abilities were interacting with each other, and together, they could be creating a completely insane and powerful effect. To test her theory, Luna asked a direct question. She wanted to know if Kushina had noticed his own body getting stronger. The question made him remember what happened in the previous fight. The enormous strength he used to defeat the monster with a single punch, Luna concluded, pointing out the inconsistency. He didn't have any ability that increased his physical strength, but somehow, he was strong enough to knock out monsters with one punch. Luna then explained her theory. She said that a series of specific conditions had aligned, and it was exactly this combination of factors that was making Kushina stronger and stronger. The penny began to drop. Kushina tried to process the information, asking for a moment to understand the logic behind that discovery. Suddenly, the scene changed to a convenience store where someone's frustration with the clerk was more than obvious. A girl exploded in anger, complaining that the employee didn't understand her order. She yelled that it was common knowledge that Loriman was the popular name for that type of cigarette. And to make matters worse, she was outraged that they had asked for age verification, questioning whether the clerk didn't see that she was obviously an adult. For her, it was a clear sign of lack of training. She continued the lecture, saying that employees should be keeping an eye out for reincarnated people just like she did. But in the middle of her complaint, something caught her attention. An unexpected movement completely startled her. Back in the present, Luna used her creation power. To prove her theory, she materialized a huge rock out of nowhere, and without warning, she slammed the rock with all her might against her own head, breaking it into pieces to show the effect on a normal body. She also hit her own arm, which was injured by the impact. Kushina watched the scene, completely shocked by her attitude. Ignoring her own pain, Luna calmly said that it was time to try again. But this time, the test would be on him. Seeing her hesitation, Kushina reassured her. He said that she didn't need to be so tense and that they would continue the test until they got some results. A little embarrassed, Luna hit Kushina's arm with the rock. But, unlike what happened to her, his arm didn't even scratch. The rock simply bounced off. She kept hitting again and again until she was completely exhausted. The effort was visible, but the result was always the same. Kushina watched his own arm, which remained intact, no matter how many times she hit it. Luna's theory was correct. His body was strengthening on its own. To prove her point, Luna remembered what she had done to herself. She hit herself with the rock, enduring the pain with each impact, all to understand the limits of that theory. The effort was visible, but her determination was even greater. She continued the process, pushing her own body to the extreme. Before she could hurt herself more, Kushina intervened. With a single movement, he stopped her blow, and the rock shattered into pieces with the force of the impact. He himself was shocked by what he did. Luna barely had time to react, surprised by the sudden intervention and the absurd strength he demonstrated without even realizing it. Lying on the ground, Kushina looked at his own hand, not understanding where so much power came from. Meanwhile, Luna seemed exhausted, but ready to finally give the answers he needed. It was then that she began to explain. Luna asked Kushina if he had ever heard of supercompensation. The young man, completely confused, replied that he had no idea what that was. She revealed that it was a natural process, something that, in theory, every human body was capable of doing. Luna used a simple example. When someone exercises, muscle fibers tear, but with adequate rest, those same fibers heal. And the main point was that, when healing, the muscles don't just return to normal. They rebuild themselves thicker and stronger than they were before. That's how muscles grow, through this process. Only, according to her, supercompensation didn't just apply to them. Even bones went through it, becoming denser after healing from fractures. She then looked at Kushina and added that, of course, it didn't work that way for normal people. That's when she connected everything to Kushina's special ability. His rapid regeneration was so powerful that it could restore even completely lost body parts. And that was the big reveal. Every time his body healed using this ability, it went through supercompensation. With each injury, he got stronger. However, Luna warned that there was a very serious problem with all of that. If his regeneration was activating supercompensation, it meant one dangerous thing. His body was in a constant state of cell division in order to regenerate. Luna gave a brief biology lesson. She explained that cells can only divide a limited number of times. The more they divide, the more a person ages until, eventually, the cells die. And that was exactly the problem. Luna recalled that Kushina's rapid regeneration had a limited number of uses, and that if he exceeded that limit, he would die. However, the mysterious girl revealed that there was a way to circumvent this weakness. It was his second ability, immortality. The logic was simple. If he didn't age, his cells would never run out of division cycles, except neither regeneration nor immortality made him invincible. If he died, he really died. But then, she mentioned Kushina's third ability, one that could overcome death itself. That ability was unshakable spirit, indomitable will. It was a power that revived him, as long as he didn't give up on life. She pointed out the irony. Despite Kushina always saying he wanted to die, his own will rejected that idea, using the ability instinctively. It finally clicked for Kushina. The girl asked if he understood what it all meant. His three abilities compensated for each other's weaknesses, making him stronger and stronger in a perfect cycle. Meanwhile, Luna watched the entire conversation from afar, through a screen. Upon hearing the explanation, she and her companion seemed to understand something much bigger. Kushina finally put all the pieces of the puzzle together. The only possible conclusion was that for him, the more he died, the stronger he became. A terrifying power with a potential that no one could yet foresee. That's when the true nature of his powers was revealed. Rapid regeneration healed him, making him stronger each time. Immortality removed any limit to that healing, and determination prevented him from dying, keeping him at 1 HP no matter the injury. Runa realized that, when combined, those three seemingly useless abilities created something totally unexpected. She then revealed to Kushina the terrible and powerful truth about his body. The more he died, the stronger he became. A true immortality based on suffering. After somehow escaping the stone monster, Kushina tried to process what he had just heard. The exhaustion from the battle mixed with the shock of the revelation. It started to sink in. The idea that his curse of extreme bad luck was actually the source of an almost infinite power was simply too much for him. And then, Kushina's mind, already accustomed to despair and tragedy, reacted in the only way it knew how. To Runa, his reaction seemed obvious. Who wouldn't be thrilled to discover they had supreme power without effort? But that smile. Only that wasn't a cry of joy. It was the sound of pure despair. The young man had not received a blessing, but the worst of curses, and now he understood the price. He vented about his curse, shouting that he couldn't even die properly. Not even get hit by a car, and as if that weren't enough, he discovered the cruelest truth of all. His curse made him stronger each time he died. In despair, the young man revolted against his own destiny, questioning how much more suffering he would still have to endure. And in the midst of his despair, a question from Noah made everything even worse. She wanted to know if the god of destiny was the same person he had met, and the terrible truth hit him like a lightning bolt. His panic was interrupted by an even greater confusion. While the young man looked around, completely frightened, the girl desperately tried to calm someone named Kushina, who was causing all the commotion. It was then that the girl came to a terrible conclusion. If attacks from the outside didn't work, the only alternative would be to cause damage from the inside. An idea that terrified her just to imagine. And without hesitation, she put her desperate plan into practice. Only then did it dawn on those watching. What the girl was eating was, without a doubt, a poisonous mushroom. The boy despaired, shouting for her to spit it out right away and force herself to vomit. The scene was so repulsive that he himself could barely contain himself, feeling his own stomach churn with what he saw. But her reaction was nothing like what Kushina expected. Instead of panic, the girl declared that the poisonous mushroom was delicious. Shocked, the young man asked if she was kidding. She insisted that it was the best mushroom she had ever eaten, and that she was even feeling good. Her conviction was so great that Kushina, overcoming his own fear, decided to try it too. That was a huge step for the girl. Since arriving in this world, she had only eaten fruit, afraid that anything else might be poison. Monster meat, for example, was too tough to chew. The effect on Kushina was immediate and bizarre. He started laughing, saying that the mushroom made him grow and shrink. That's when the girl understood. He was hallucinating. That mushroom was dangerous after all. Suddenly, something even stranger happened. Kushina noticed that the girl's body seemed to be getting stronger and more muscular than his. She denied it right away, but the transformation was visible. Kushina's hallucination took an unexpected turn. He became euphoric with her new strength, asking her to use her sexy arms to strangle him to death. And then, the effect of the mushroom manifested in another way. Kushina started running at an absurd speed, laughing that his legs were also faster, leaving the girl behind. He fled aimlessly, shouting that he would go wherever the wind took him. The girl ran after him, reminding him of his promise to protect her. At that moment, Kushina spotted people ahead, but she thought it was just another hallucination. But it wasn't. They had reached the gates of a city. A guard spotted them, and, seeing the state of the pair, asked if they were adventurers and offered to open the passage. The gate opened, revealing a bustling city. For the two, who had been lost in the forest for so long, that place seemed like a true oasis. After so much danger and uncertainty, they had finally found civilization, a safe place where they could finally rest. The joy of arriving in the city was immense, but the girl's celebration was interrupted by a scream of horror as she looked at Kushina's face, which was covered in strange spots. Kushina explained that the hallucinations were passing and that he felt fine, ironically lamenting that he hadn't managed to die again. But the girl retorted that he didn't look fine at all. Suddenly, a hand touched the girl's shoulder, and a man asked if she was okay. Only then did it dawn on her. The ordeal in the forest was over, and the relief hit her hard. Only the man who offered help didn't seem friendly at all. With a sinister smile and the head of a monster on his back, his presence was anything but comforting. The girl's relief was short-lived. Upon facing the man, she realized that they had just left one problem to enter another, perhaps even worse. But the man's reaction wasn't one of threat, but of pure amusement. He laughed, finding their dread funny and asking if they had mistaken him for a forest monster. The tension dissipated as quickly as it arose. The men who were adventurers invited them to eat and apologized, joking that their aura of strength must have scared the youngsters. For the girl, that meal was paradise. After so long surviving on what she found in the forest, she could hardly believe she was eating real food again. The adventurer explained that, judging by their appearance, he thought they were veterans hunting a big reward, but now he saw that they were just a pair of lost rookies. And then, he began to explain the reason for his concern, revealing that the forest they came from was infested with dangerous creatures. He showed the poster of a storm monkey, a creature so powerful that not even a group of 10 experienced adventurers could defeat it. The reward was high, but the risk was certain death. Kushina was shocked by the information. The veteran's advice was direct and blunt. If he encountered one of those creatures, the only option was to run without thinking twice. The adventurers burst out laughing again, saying it was too early for brats like them to try their luck there. The final advice was brutal. If they ran into the monster, they'd better just accept their own end. With the warning given, the man simply asked for another round of drinks, ending the subject. That's when the waitress approached, questioning whether the adventurers could pay for all that, since she knew they had only taken the cheapest job of the day. Without the slightest ceremony, the two veterans ran off, shouting for her to put it on the tab, leaving the waitress behind with a pile of dishes and the loss. The waitress then turned and, without a word, passed the bill and the dishes directly to Kushina. The girl didn't understand what was happening. The woman's expression made it clear that someone would have to pay. And it was at that moment that Kushina and the girl realized a small detail. They were completely broke. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the tranquility of the water was broken by something gigantic moving beneath the surface, leaving the locals in a state of shock and apprehension. After becoming indebted, Kushina and his shadow found a solution. The monster he defeated had value, and now they just needed to know where to collect the money. And the reward for the hunt was not small. The sound of the coins filling the bag was proof that their immediate financial problems were solved. Kushina examined one of the coins, perhaps the first reward he had received for his effort. The weight of the gold in his hands was a new sensation. Luna, always one step ahead, had already researched local costs. She confirmed that the money was more than enough to pay off the debt, rent a room, and even take a bath. She also commented on how easily Kushina defeated the magic beasts of the forest. But the young man replied that the credit wasn't just his. It was then that Luna revealed a frustrating piece of information. The storm monkeys and stone dragons that Kushina had killed in the forest had huge bounties. She explained that all parts of those creatures, from the skin to the meat, were high-demand materials and worth a fortune on the market. The problem was that they didn't even know where the bodies were, which meant that a huge amount of money was simply left behind, a complete waste. The news hit Kushina in an unexpected way. He, who sought strong monsters to find his end, realized that he was, ironically, wasting fortunes that could change his life. He looked at his hand, remembering the promise to protect Luna. Because of her, he couldn't simply give in to death. However, the monsters seemed weaker and weaker, pushing him away from his goal. A dark thought began to form. What if, by continuing to fight and regenerate to fulfill his promise, he ended up becoming immortal, unable to die forever? His thoughts were interrupted by a little girl who approached with a direct and urgent question. She wanted to know if they were capable of defeating really strong monsters. With tears in her eyes, the girl begged them to kill the monster that took her father's life. The sudden request caught Kushina and Luna by surprise. The creature was a wind tiger, a lethal predator from the Final Calamity Forest, a monster that controlled the wind and was considered one of the most dangerous in the region. The girl said that her father was a very strong and experienced adventurer, but even he was no match for the fury of that beast. The little girl's request hung in the air, creating a heavy silence. Faced with that plea, Kushina and his companion needed to make a decision, but the situation was much more complex than it seemed. Luna understood Kushina's motivation, seeing a parallel between his desire for revenge and the girl's. She then called him to talk in private, away from the child's ears. She tried to argue, listing all the logical reasons not to go. It was a suicide mission for a complete stranger, against a monster stronger than anything they had ever faced. But Kushina's mind was already made up. He stated that they would fight. Kushina simply asked if she had forgotten his true objective, which left Luna completely shocked. It was as if none of her warnings had been heard. With a disturbing smile, Kushina reminded her of his ultimate desire: to die. For him, a powerful monster was not a threat, but the perfect opportunity he had been looking for. Luna was horrified by his logic. She tried to explain the flaw in his plan. Facing the wind tiger would not kill him. It would only activate his regeneration, making him even stronger with each death. The terrible truth hit Kushina hard. Luna confirmed his greatest fear. This cycle of death and regeneration would make him so powerful that, eventually, nothing in the world could grant him the end he so desired. He finally understood the cruel irony of his ability. It only worked because he wasn't afraid of death. Trapped in this cycle, the young man panicked, realizing that he needed to die soon before it was too late. Cornered by his own immortality, Kushina collapsed in complete despair. If fighting didn't kill him and not fighting forced him to live, he didn't know what to do anymore. Seeing his despair, Luna began to think of a solution. She highlighted the activation condition of the ability: Kushina's total absence of fear of death. The solution she proposed was counterintuitive but brilliant. If the desire to die was the trigger, perhaps the ability wouldn't activate if he started to find joy in living. The concept of joy was something completely foreign to Kushina. He couldn't even imagine how to start looking for a feeling that he had long lost. Luna was momentarily speechless at his question, as if the answer should be obvious. She explained that finding his own happiness was a journey that only he could make. His current obsession with death was blinding him to any other possibilities that life could offer. Her advice was clear: stop looking for an end, and instead, start exploring the world around him. Learn, experience, and perhaps find something worth living for. Kushina processed Luna's advice. If the goal was to learn about the world, then he had an immediate question, a single thing he needed to know before anything else. Luna tried to remind him of his recent achievements, but Kushina interrupted her. He questioned why she cared about his decision to fight the wind tiger, since the risk was only his. He couldn't understand her insistence. If the life at stake was his, why was she trying to stop him? Luna admitted that he was strange, but reminded him that they came from the same world and had been through all of this together. She wasn't heartless enough to simply ignore what he was about to do. The truth was simple and direct. Deep down, she just didn't want him to be unhappy. Her sincerity hit him hard, taking him completely by surprise. She acknowledged that it sounded hypocritical, since she had just given him the key to deactivate his ability. Kushina sensed the conflict in her words, clenching his fist tightly. He then countered the argument with a difficult question. Would avoiding the fight against the Wind Tiger really stop him from feeling miserable? Caught off guard, Luna admitted that, honestly, she didn't know the answer. She explained that it would be frivolous to promise someone happiness without any proof. It was logic that Kushina couldn't disagree with. Kushina realized that, for the first time, they were understanding each other. He admitted that maybe he was wrong about them, and Luna, in turn, confessed that hearing that made her happy. And then, she connected the dots in a way he had never thought of. If he didn't want to suffer, didn't that mean deep down that he wanted to be happy? The logic left him speechless. It was a moment of clarity for Kushina. He finally began to understand what that feeling was, that confusion inside him. But the deep conversation was suddenly interrupted. A girl appeared at the door, curious to know what the two were talking about. Bluntly, the newcomer informed Kushina that they couldn't fight the Wind Tiger. The news shocked Luna, demanding an immediate explanation. Kushina tried to apologize, but his words shocked the girl. The conversation had taken a turn she definitely didn't expect. Without saying anything else, she simply turned around and ran away, leaving Kushina behind with the young woman who had interrupted everything. The newcomer, however, seemed to think that was the best thing to do. For her, the other girl's departure was a solution, not a problem. Only Kushina's expression terrified her. She questioned him about that bizarre smile, asking if he happened to enjoy being cold to people. He then tried to explain his distorted logic. He quoted an old saying about how luck comes to those who smile, but that an evil smile like his would scare away even good luck. Deep down, the reason was simple. He just wanted to be happy. A desire that he didn't know how to achieve the right way, and that's why he had chosen not to fight. He believed that avoiding conflict and forcing a smile would lead him to the happiness he so sought. The next morning, Kushina woke up in a simple room. Sunlight streamed through the window, marking the start of a new day. He felt refreshed, realizing that he had had a great night's sleep, much better than he was used to in his old home. His companion's morning, however, didn't start so well. She woke up being devoured by a bed that was actually a monster. The innkeeper admitted that the mimic bed was an experiment that failed. She still considered selling the idea if it was comfortable, which made the girl indignant for being used as a guinea pig. The innkeeper tried to calm her down, assuring her that the monster was harmless because an adventurer had castrated it. The girl was even more confused, not understanding how you castrate a bed. Curious, Kushina decided to try the monster bed, and to everyone's surprise, he found the whole thing surprisingly cozy. Instead of panicking, Kushina started playing with the monster as if it were a puppy, leaving his companion completely clueless as to what was happening. Trying to ignore the bizarre scene, the girl decided to focus on what mattered. She proposed that, after breakfast, they go to the market to buy supplies and explore the city. Kushina reflected on his companion's proposal. The chance to finally explore that new world seemed like a great idea. But his thoughts were interrupted abruptly. Someone had blocked their path, to the surprise of both of them. They were the city guards. They introduced themselves and made a serious accusation. Kushina and the girl were suspected of attacking other adventurers to steal their hunts. The guard continued, coldly explaining the consequences if they were found guilty in the upcoming trial. The punishment for such a crime was the most severe of all, the death penalty. Their situation had just taken a drastic turn for the worse. Scan credits panel, ignored. Scan credits panel, ignored. The story then paused to show who Kushina's companion was. She introduced herself as Luna, an energetic, reincarnated person who was summoned to that world by some god. In her early days, she decided to analyze the local cuisine, starting with the most basic dish they offered her, bread and soup. The first impression was not good at all. The bread was hard as iron and thin as paper, but she tried to analyze the flavor, wondering if the grains were the same as in her world. That's when Luna discovered the secret ingredient, that gave the food a special touch. A colorful mold that covered the bread. A mole rat that frequented the room appeared and ate the moldy bread. The reaction was immediate. The poor animal began to foam at the mouth. Seeing what happened to the animal, Luna felt bad for it. With the bread out of the question, the only option left was to use the soup to trick her hunger. But the final disappointment was yet to come. Upon tasting the soup, she realized that it was nothing more than hot water, with no flavor at all. Life in that world would not be easy at all. Back in the present, the reality of the accusation landed like a stone. Trapped in a cell, Luna complained that this wasn't exactly the fantasy experience she was expecting when she came to this world. A guard appeared, telling the criminals to shut up. Kushina, in turn, simply noted that this was her first time in prison and hoped it would be her last. Luna couldn't contain herself and tried to defend their honor. She shouted to the guard that they weren't criminals and that Kushina had obtained the money from hunting completely fairly. The guard retorted with bizarre logic, saying that only criminals ate moss. Little did he know that Kushina was doing exactly that, and even finding the taste quite good. The man threatened to throw Kushina into solitary confinement, but the charade was interrupted by a real guard, who told him to stop impersonating an officer. The real guard explained that this gentleman was just a prisoner who liked to pretend to be an authority figure and that the best thing to do was simply ignore him. Luna didn't understand anything until she saw the prisoner enjoying a luxurious private cell. It became clear that even in prison, money could buy anything. She realized that if they stayed there, they would end up being labeled as real criminals. That's when Luna remembered that she had an ability that allowed her to create things. As she prepared for an improvised escape, a guard appeared at the cell. He informed them that they had been summoned by the church. The reason was simple and direct. The court session was about to begin. They were taken from the cell straight to the courtroom, where they would face the judge to answer the charges. The trial began with the judge asking for the defendant's name. Kushina responded, a little uncertain, introducing himself as Muto Futoshi. When it was her turn, the girl introduced herself as Luna Kagamiin. Kushina recognized the surname, remembering that people from the Kagamiin family were known for never crying. He admitted that he had always been curious about her last name, which left Luna a little surprised by the sudden comment. The judge demanded respect in the courtroom, but Kushina completely ignored him. He turned to Luna and said that he thought her last name was very cool. The judge began the trial by explaining how the court worked. The decision of guilt or innocence would not be his, but rather a jury made up of ordinary citizens, chosen completely at random. The gravity of the situation hit Luna hard. The judge made it clear that if they were found guilty of theft, the punishment would be the death penalty. There was no middle ground. With the rules established, the judge turned to the captain of the guard and ordered him to explain the incident that brought them there. The accusation was clear. According to the report, Kushina and Luna stole monster carcasses from other adventurers, claimed them as their own, and exchanged them for money. Luna couldn't believe the lie she was hearing. And then, they saw the person responsible for the denunciation. The girl they refused to help before was there, in the audience, visibly pleased with their situation. The truth became obvious to Kushina and Luna. All of this was nothing more than petty revenge, simply because they didn't help that girl when she asked. Outraged, Luna protested, stating that the accusation was false and baseless. She demanded that the alleged victim of the theft be brought to court, since there was no formal complaint. The captain ignored Luna's protest and changed focus. He questioned how they got so much money in just one day, implying that the amount was suspicious. To prove his point, he showed the average reward for a monster hunt, just a few coins, a ridiculously small amount compared to what Kushina and Luna earned. The comparison shocked the jury. For them, the math simply didn't add up. Luna tried to interrupt, realizing that the captain's logic was poisoning everyone's opinion. The captain admitted that skilled adventurers could indeed have large profits. However, he stressed that this would require careful planning and large teams, not just two rookies. And then, he delivered the final blow. Kushina and Luna, newly arrived in the city, would have managed it alone on the first day. For the captain, this was impossible. They must have done something illegal. The seed of doubt blossomed. The public began to agree with the captain, convinced that the two were thieves. Fear spread. If they stole from adventurers, the next would be the citizens. Luna realized they were lost. And that's when the captain revealed the cruel truth of that court. Facts and evidence didn't matter. The only thing that decided the verdict was the impression the jury had of them, and that impression had already been formed. Luna realized that she was losing control of the situation. She was falling exactly into the trap that the captain had prepared, and the pace of the trial was being dictated by them. In an act of desperation, she snapped. Luna argued that it was crazy to condemn someone for a crime that didn't even have a victim present. The entire trial was a sham. She then challenged the court, demanding that they bring the alleged victim to testify if she really existed. The response was immediate and violent. The guards advanced with their spears, treating her protest as a direct threat to the order of the court. The judge intervened, stating that adventurer fraud was a serious threat. For him, the fact that they had such high earnings was already reason enough for suspicion. Luna couldn't believe the absurdity she was hearing. With no more options, she turned to Kushina, begging him to say something. They were treating all his achievements as a blatant lie. But Kushina wasn't paying attention. That situation reminded him of something painful from his past. The way his parents always blamed him for everything, even when he was innocent. He learned the hard way that, in moments like that, the safest thing to do was simply stay quiet. While Luna called him, the young man sank into those bitter memories, until suddenly, something changed. Kushina turned around with a disturbing expression and asked if they wanted him to prove his strength right there, at that very moment. Luna's reaction was pure panic. She recognized that scary smile and realized that the attempt to make Kushina react had backfired. Completely ignoring the scene, the judge announced that it was time for the decision. He asked the jury if they were ready to give the verdict. The jury's opinion was already formed. One of them openly admitted that they simply didn't trust the two of them. Luna understood that the situation was terrible. Kushina apologized for not being of any help, but Luna replied that she didn't expect anything anymore. She felt the court's atmosphere weighing down, heading towards an inevitable conviction. At that moment, Kushina reflected on his ability. He still didn't feel good about it, but at least he had managed to make someone happy, even if only for a short time. He then realized the irony. It was precisely this power that had put them in that situation. Luna, in turn, concluded that the justice system in that place was completely broken. But Luna refused to accept that fate. She yelled for them not to give up and to fight against that injustice. Her words echoed in Kushina's mind, breaking the silence of his resignation. Luna then confronted the court. She accused them of being ready to execute them based on a baseless justice, without any proof that they had committed a crime. Kushina watched, impressed. With a single sentence, she had changed the atmosphere of the place, facing them all completely alone. He hoped that her words would reach the jury, but he knew human cruelty. If the vote didn't change, the two of them would be executed. In the past, Kushina would have accepted that end. But now, he wanted to understand more about that world. And it was at that moment that he realized he had a way out. As the guards advanced against Luna, Kushina prepared to intervene. He needed to remember that they were people, not monsters. He wound up the punch, but hesitated at the last instant. He needed to restrain himself. He couldn't use his full strength against humans. So, he diverted the blow and hit a gargoyle statue. The impact was so powerful that the stone disintegrated instantly. The guards panicked, believing they were under attack by real gargoyles. Chaos took over the hall. People ran desperately, and confusion spread everywhere with Luna in the middle of it all. Kushina took advantage of the distraction and destroyed another statue, further fueling the general panic. Debris flew throughout the court, making the scene look like a real attack. Amidst the confusion, the guards instinctively moved to protect Luna. Kushina looked at the result of his actions, shocked. He tried to hold back, but in the end, he couldn't control his own strength. And with the chaos installed and the escape underway, the trial came to an unexpected end. But at what cost? The story continues amidst the chaos of the court. After a fabricated accusation, Kushina took a desperate action to escape. He just wanted to create a distraction. But things quickly got out of control. And the power he was trying to hide was revealed in a frightening way. The gargoyle statue, which once decorated the hall, now lay in pieces on the floor, as proof of his strength. Kushina looked at the destruction, shocked. In his mind, he had only punched the creature to knock it unconscious, not to destroy it. Amidst the rubble of that place, he finally understood the true dimension of his power. The escape from the trial had become something much bigger. His original plan was simple: scare the guards by hitting one of them lightly, just to get an opening and escape that ridiculous trial. He swore to himself that he intended to hold back. But when the monster suddenly appeared, his instinct took over. Dread took over Kushina. He realized that if he hadn't held back a little, he would have killed the guard. The doubt about being able to control this power was terrifying. One of the guards approached, genuinely concerned. He asked if Kushina was okay, if he hadn't been hurt in the confusion. But Kushina reacted aggressively. He broke the guard's spear with his own hands and warned him not to approach, as the result would not just be a scratch. With a look of despair, he lamented that he might never again be able to do something as simple as petting an animal. The guard, in turn. The sound of metal echoed with the arrival of a new figure. He had thought that all that commotion was only because of the trial, but now he realized that the situation was quite different. The scene continues. The arrival of the new adventurer changed the mood in the room. The people recognized him instantly, calling out his name, Agat. His presence brought immediate relief to the tense situation. With Agat there, everyone felt safe. One of the locals explained to the girl, who didn't know him, that he was the greatest adventurer in the city, completely unrivaled. In fact, the boy realized that the problem had already been solved before Agat even needed to do anything. For an adventurer of that level, a simple gargoyle was no threat at all. Only then, the boy remembered an important detail. Looking at Kushina, who continued to keep his head down, he wondered if the young man hadn't been the one truly responsible for defeating the monster. The girls then explained the reason for the trial. Kushina and his partner were being accused of theft simply because they were making too much money hunting monsters as a duo. The tension in the room finally broke into laughter. Everyone realized that it was just a huge misunderstanding and that the city guard had made a bad mistake. One of the guards approached Kushina and, in a very casual way, asked him not to cause any more confusion like that in the future. The girl was furious with the lack of consideration, demanding that they at least feign some remorse. But the guard just ended the matter, sending everyone home. Agat then turned to the girl and confronted her directly. He said that she had told a very ugly lie to save her own skin. She tried to defend herself, blaming Kushina for starting the confusion. Agat interrupted her, warning that even as a child, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. The guard left the decision in Agat's hands, treating him like a captain. The adventurer, in turn, told the girl that there was no point in saying anything, as she would do whatever she wanted anyway. Despite being annoyed by his manner, the girl admitted that Agat had saved them from execution. She then wondered how monsters could appear inside a city with such high walls. Agat commented that flying monsters could get through, but that something still didn't add up. To him, it had all been too convenient to be a simple coincidence. He then approached Kushina, placing his hand on his shoulder and calling him a fool for letting himself be used. Then, he told the two to follow him. While Agat led them away, two men took advantage of the distraction near the defeated monster. One of them thought about taking the horn to sell, but the other warned him of the danger of ending up in a false trial. With the confusion over and everyone leaving, the two men saw the perfect opportunity. No one was looking at the body of the monster that Kushina had defeated anymore. One of them decided that it wouldn't hurt to take just one horn, as it would be worth good money. However, when he tried to cut it off, something completely unexpected happened. To the man's surprise, the monster's horn crumbled in his hand, revealing itself to be nothing more than a pile of wood and branches. The gargoyle wasn't real. In the distance, the real person behind the farce sighed in relief. The girl, named Ricard, saw that her illusion had worked perfectly, and soon her partner called her. Agathe then made formal introductions. He and his partner Ricard were mid-level adventurers operating in that city. Kushina's companion finally understood everything. The reason why the residents and guards believed Agathe without hesitation was because he was the strongest and most trusted adventurer in the region. With a smile, Agathe confessed the truth behind all the confusion. He and Ricard had staged the whole scene. He explained that the plan was simple: create a distraction with a fake gargoyle so they could get Kushina out of there discreetly. What they didn't expect was for Kushina to solve the problem with brute force. But Kushina's mind was still trapped in the despair from before. The idea of never being able to do something as simple as petting an animal, for fear of his own power, haunted him. The girl commented that despite looking incredibly real up close, the monster fell apart when approached, as it was made only of branches. Ricard explained that it wasn't magic, but a skill she used. It was the best she could do to create the gargoyle's shape and movements, and fortunately, it fooled everyone. Agathe concluded that, in any case, the mission was a success. The most important thing was that Kushina was officially safe from execution. Kushina, however, didn't seem relieved. He processed the information in silence, feeling that there was something more behind all that help. He then turned and went straight to the point, asking what their real motive was. No one would do all that for a stranger without wanting something in return. Agathe's smile. The adventurer responded to Kushina's distrust with a sharp question. He wanted to know if the boy really believed that they were just good Samaritans, who saved two strangers out of pure kindness, with no interest behind it. The question hung in the air, marking the end of another stage of the journey. Kushina was finally safe from execution, but now faced a new uncertainty: the true price of his freedom. What did those mysterious saviors really want from him? The answer to that question would completely change his destiny.